And we start with the Fox News alert on the manhunt for that killer after another deadly attack has hit Turkey. 8 people so far have been arrested, but that shooter is not among them, all in connection with that massacre that happened over the weekend at that Istanbul nightclub that left 39 people dead. Now ISIS praising that shooter as one of its own. Good morning, everyone. I'm Eric Shawn, and this is America's Newsroom.
And I'm Patty Ann Brown. Bill and Martha are off today. Happy New Year, everyone. Turkey is vowing to bring the terrorists to justice. Surveillance video shows the initial moments of the attack. The gunman shot and killed 39 people and wounded many more as he stormed an upscale nightclub on New Year's Eve. Many victims were foreigners. One American was among the wounded.
Benjamin Hall is live now in London with the very latest on the manhunt and the aftermath of this massacre. Benjamin, what's the latest?
Well, hi, Eric. Well, yes, Istanbul remains on high alert as this manhunt gets underway. Police still trying to confirm his identity, and this just the same day as ISIS claimed responsibility for the massacre on New Year's Eve. Today, the funerals of some of those who were killed began taking place as the identity of more victims were released. Among the 39 killed, 27 were foreign, including victims from Israel, Germany, Russia, France, India, Belgium, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. Earlier today, ISIS said in a statement via their Amaq news agency that the attack had been carried out by a, quote, heroic soldier of theirs. The terror group also said that the attack was retaliation for Turkish airstrikes in Syria. More details of the attack have also now been emerging. The gunman who fired up to 180 bullets stopped to change magazine 5 times. He arrived at the club by taxi before rushing through the entrance with a long-barreled gun that he had taken from the boot of the car. And it's also interesting that he had an escape route planned. He changed his clothes on the way out, and that is different to normal ISIS attacks, which would often see the attacker committing suicide. So there's still concerns for a follow-up attack in Istanbul. Eric?
So, Benjamin, while they're trying to confirm the identity exactly of the suspect, what more do we know about the terrorist?
Well, you're right. His identity is still unknown, but police do suspect that he might be part of the same ISIS cell which attacked Istanbul airport back in June. That attack left 41 killed. As a result, Turkish officials believe the attacker might be from the Central Asian countries of Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan. Today, victims also began talking about the deadly scene inside the club.
I was in the party and I was drinking. Precise moment, somebody come and shot everyone in the club, and we are sleeping on the floor, something like that. And thank God we are safe now, and we are good.
So this horrible New Year's Eve massacre still unsolved, the attacker still at the loose. 8 people already arrested, as you said, but the attacker not among them. Until he is found, Istanbul police are saying that they must remain vigilant and on high alert. Eric?
Well, they certainly will know more when they finally get him. Benjamin Hall in London this morning. Thank you. Patty Ann?
Eric, the State Department confirms that 35 Russian diplomats and their families have left the United States. The Obama administration expelled them over Moscow's hacking of the Democratic National Committee. This as President-elect Trump is set to be briefed by national intelligence officials on those hacking allegations. Peter Ducey is live now from Trump Tower here in New York City. Peter, the president-elect is still skeptical that Russia was behind the hacking. Why?
Patty Ann, the president-elect says that he's got some evidence he wants to keep under his hat until tomorrow or the next day, and that is the reason that he is skeptical. But he's not, and the president-elect further is not trying to suggest the U.S. intel community is trying to mislead anybody, but he just doesn't think they have the track record that deserves trust all the time.
I just want them to be sure, because it's a pretty serious charge, and I want them to be sure. And if you look at the weapons of mass destruction, that was a disaster, and they were wrong. And so I want them to be sure. I think it's unfair if they don't know. And I know a lot about hacking, and hacking is a very hard thing to prove. So it could be somebody else. And I also know things that other people don't know, and so they cannot be sure of the situation.
Mr. Trump also says no computer is safe anywhere in the world, so if somebody really wanted something to be kept a secret, they should just write it down on a piece of paper and have it delivered by courier. Patty Ann.
Or just word of mouth. Good point there. So is the president-elect giving any clues as to whether he plans to keep in place those sanctions against Russia?
His team said this morning that the president-elect plans to wait until after getting this highly classified, highly publicized briefing about possible Russian involvement in the election process. The intel officials are going to meet with Mr. Trump to explain why it is they're so certain Russia is the culprit. And while Mr. Trump decides if he wants to double down, his team is saying they think there's a double standard when it comes to who gets punished by the Obama White House.
In April of 2015, the Chinese stole millions of personal documents, classified information on individuals who have and are serving in our government, and yet there was not a single statement from the White House then. So in this case, you have 35 people being expelled, 12 degrees of sanctions being imposed, 2 sites being happened. Is this a political response or is it a diplomatic response?
2017 started off yesterday with Republican Senator Tom Cotton complaining the Obama White House's punishment for Russia was too little too late. And even though the next president may get rid of those sanctions, the transition team insists there is no rift between the incoming White House and the next Congress. Patty Ann.
All right, Peter Ducey reporting live. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And for more on this, let's go to John McCormick. He's senior writer for the Weekly Standard. John, are these expulsions really too little too late to stem Russian aggression and misbehavior?
Well, given everything that's happened over the last several years, I mean, not just these credible accusations of hacking the campaign, the fact that, you know, Russia invaded Ukraine, pro-Russian forces shot down a civilian airliner. I mean, I think that this does seem like a symbolic slap on the wrist. I do think that President-elect Trump should really think through, you know, he's skeptical right now that Russia definitely was behind the hacking, but he should think through what exactly would be the appropriate response if he does come to the conclusion that they did this. And is 35, is this enough? I mean, are they actually going to do something to stop this from happening in the future?
Well, what type of response do you think he could achieve or engage on that would be stronger and send Vladimir Putin a stronger message? Is Mr. Trump even capable of doing that?
Well, he definitely seems to be cozying up to Russia. He's had a positive view of Putin for some time, even though he did agree with Mitt Romney in 2014. He agreed with Mitt Romney when Mitt Romney said that Russia was a top geopolitical foe in 2012. In 2014, after all this bad behavior by Russia, Trump sided with Romney and said that Romney was right and Obama was wrong. So you can't say that Obama was wrong for mocking Mitt Romney in 2012 and then now saying that Russia is no big threat. You got to decide one way or the other. You know, I'm not sure exactly what the appropriate response would be, but that's something that the president-elect and his national security team will think through. I mean, what you want here is you want to create a deterrent so that the Russians realize they're not going to do this in the future. Other people are going to be not going to do this in the future. So I don't know exactly what that is, but you need to think in terms of deterrence and not just a symbolic slap back at these people.
Yeah, what about Mr. Trump's skepticism? I mean, some in Washington are very troubled by this, with the CIA and the FBI both concluding that the Russians hacked the election with the intention of tipping the election to Mr. Trump. Yet others are saying, no, he's taking a wait-and-see attitude to try and really have a reset with Russia.
Well, it is true that, I mean, the CIA and the FBI have not released all the information. They say they don't want to compromise their sources for how they've done this research. Maybe we'll learn more in time. I don't know exactly, you know, how much we need to know publicly to come to a conclusion on this. But as I said, you know, President-elect Trump needs to step back and just consider the whole context of Russia's relationship. Remember that, you know, he's going to be the president of the United States. He's going to be the leader of the free world. And at the end of the day, Vladimir Putin is still a second-rate authoritarian thug. So, you know, any tweets that make it seem like he's sort of cozying up to Putin, praising him for his smarts, it's not a good look for the president of the United States.
Yeah, well, you know, Mr. Trump hasn't had the view that he's a second-rate authoritarian thug, as you just put it. So finally, I mean, do you think he says he has some new information about the hacking? Do you think we'll have a change of tune once he gets the intelligence briefing? And do you think there'll be a bit of a change of tune for Mr. Trump once he becomes president of the United States?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that depends, I guess, on what he does learn. I do think, though, that President-elect Trump and his team should sort of reject this premise that it would delegitimize his election if Russia was involved in the hacking. I mean, there are 17 reasons off the top of my head why Hillary Clinton lost that had nothing to do with the WikiLeaks. You know, both of these campaigns had private conversations released. You know, Donald Trump with the Access Hollywood tape, that was very damaging to him. And the election ended up turning out the way it turned out. I think that you can make the strong case that there are many, many reasons why other than WikiLeaks, that WikiLeaks was not determinative, and even if Russia did have a role in it, it didn't decide the outcome of the election. And so I think that the defensiveness by Trump and his team, it's also not a good look. It does seem to sort of implicitly accept this premise of the Democrats who are trying to delegitimize his election. I think that Donald Trump can say, listen, the election shook out the way it did. I'm going to act in the interest of America, regardless of how it looks in terms of partisan politics. I'm going to stand up for what's right for America.
Well, we certainly see what he will say after this briefing and what he'll tell us in a couple of days what he has. And certainly this all fits Moscow's MO, trying to destabilize and cast doubt on the credibility of the West. John McCormick of the Weekly Standard, thank you for being with us this morning. And Happy New Year, by the way.
Happy New Year.
Of course. Patty Ann?
Well, flames and debris rain down as two planes collide in midair. What caused this deadly tragedy?
And pressing for change at the United Nations, how one former U.S. ambassador to the UN says the president-elect should retaliate for that anti-Israel resolution.
And the Obama administration retaliating for alleged Russian hacking. The sanctions earning bipartisan praise, while some call them too little too late. We'll have a fair and balanced debate right ahead.
It's not enough, Shannon, and it's certainly too late. Vladimir Putin is KGB. He always has been. He always will be. President Obama has consistently looked the other way.
Officials are now investigating the deadly mid-air collision of two small planes that happened just outside Dallas. This was the fiery and tragic scene just moments after that collision happened. Police say the two small planes are operating under visual flight rules. That means they were not in contact with an air traffic controller. 3 people, sadly, were killed in that mid-air collision.
And now to the U.S. response to alleged Russian hacking. We're hearing more praise from congressional Republicans for President Obama's sanctions targeting Russia and President Vladimir Putin. Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton is one of those supporting the sanctions, but he also joins a growing group of lawmakers who say this action should have come a long time ago.
It's not enough, Shannon, and it's certainly too late. Vladimir Putin is KGB. He always has been. He always will be. President Obama has consistently looked the other way from Russia's provocations and aggressions. I'm glad the president has finally realized the threat that Russia poses to the United States and our interests, but I wish he had recognized this 8 years ago.
All right, joining us now, Katie Pavlich, the news editor for townhall.com and a Fox News contributor, and Marianne Marsh, a former senior advisor to Secretary of State John Kerry. So we heard Republicans in agreement that Russia must be held accountable. We just saw Senator Cotton, also House Speaker Paul Ryan, Mike McCall, who chairs the House Committee on Homeland Security, all saying they support what President Obama is doing right now with the sanctions, but also saying it's not enough and also asking why now. Marianne?
Well, I think Democrats agree with Tom Cotton. President Obama should have done much more, much sooner, because there's evidence that the administration knew about this hacking as far back as 2015. So it is too little too late. The problem is it's more than what Donald Trump will do. And the fact is, we know that this has affected the election. We know they've had the willingness and the ability to hack into not only the election, but other things. And no one seems to be doing anything about it. And now it looks like Obama and Trump are both trying to run out the clock. Obama's trying to get out the door and maybe release this report on his way out the door. He needs to release the report today. And Donald Trump is trying to run out the clock until he runs the government and nothing else will be done.
Let's be clear here, though. I want to stop you because you said we know that Russia hacked into the election. We got to be careful here. Russia did not hack into the election. A poll just came out that said that more than 50% of Democrats believe that Russia actually hacked into the voting tallies and changed them, which is completely false. And that's kind of the narrative that people are going with. So we want to clear that up, first of all. But, you know, Katie, the hacking, just one of many troubling moves by Russia. You know, Senator Cotton also saying, look, this country interfered with our NATO ships. Of course, the annexation of Crimea. He says this hacking was minor compared to some of these other actions. So why tie these sanctions only to the hacking?
Well, look, I also think it's very important to point out that Russia did not hack into voting machines, as some people have alleged. They hacked into the DNC, which their interference had nothing to do and no impact on the election results in terms of numbers. So that's the first thing. Wow. The second thing is that I think it's very important to point out here that neither political party should be benefiting from Russian interference. And it is true that over the last 8 years, Russia has done a lot to interfere, not just with elections in Europe and in the United States, but also with being very provocative in their part of the world. And we haven't necessarily issued a proper response. There was that famous moment between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama during the 2012 election where Mitt Romney warned about Russia and the implications it could have not only in the United States but in the world. And President Obama made a joke out of it and said he wanted his foreign policy back from the 1980s. And here we are today. It's important that we recognize that Russia is not a friend to the United States. They are a threat despite their propaganda maybe warming up to our country. And it's important for both political parties to put politics aside and realize that the best interest of the United States is not cozying up to the Russians.
Marianne?
This is more than politics. The fact is, this isn't a Democratic issue. It's not a Republican issue. It is an American issue. And when anybody, let alone Russia, tries to interfere with our democracy, which is what this is, then everyone should unite against it. The problem is, every chance Donald Trump has had the opportunity to pick between Russia and Putin and America, he's picked Russia and Putin every single time. During the campaign, during the election, since the election, right up to this very day. That is the problem. And number two, we do not yet know whether or not Russia did get into any other of the machines or anything else because no one's looked at the machines. They hacked into the National Election Commission. Katie, I'm happy to give you a school.
You're not connected to the internet. You can't hack into them.
I'm going to spare you. Katie, I'm going to spare you on this one, okay? Don't go any further than that. The rest of this story has yet to be told, and when it is, every American should be horrified, and they should be very concerned that Donald Trump not only sides with Putin and the Russians every time, he's not going to do anything about this, and everyone should ask
if you're going to make that argument, you could also argue that President Obama sides with the Russians, because as you mentioned, he knew about this in the fall of 2015, a year before the election, and did nothing about it. Why? Because he thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. He thought she was going to walk right into the White House to secure his legacy, and she lost, and therefore now President Obama is doing something about it because it didn't benefit him. And so if we're going to argue that one side of the aisle is on the side of the Russians, well, President Obama's been in office for the past 8 years, and Russian has been emboldened to continue their actions not only with the United States, but also in their part of the world.
All right, Katie, Marianne, thank you both so much for joining us. Happy New Year.
Thanks, Patty Ann. Happy New Year.
Well, Patty Ann, North Korea ringing in the new year with a warning. Have you heard about this? Kim Jong-un saying a new weapon in his arsenal could reach us. And he says it's almost ready for testing.
Also, a new call to fight the United Nations in the wake of a resolution condemning Israel. We'll talk with a key member of Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet. But first, here's President-elect Trump.
I'm very, very strong on Israel. I think Israel's been treated very, very unfairly by a lot of different people. You look at resolutions in the United Nations, you take a look at what's happened. They're up for 20 reprimands, and other nations that are horrible places that treat people horribly haven't even been reprimanded. So there's something going on, and I think it's very unfair to Israel.
Brings a new warning from North Korea. Kim Jong-un saying the regime is close to testing an intercontinental ballistic missile. That would mark a potential breakthrough in Pyongyang's weapons program. The North Korean leader did not say whether a test was imminent, but his birthday is on January 8th. And last year, North Korea conducted a test on January 6th.
Well, there's new fallout this morning from the United Nations Security Council resolution condemning Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations John Bolton now calling on the incoming Trump administration to retaliate against the UN and the countries that voted for the resolution. In an interview, the ambassador said, quote, "I think what Israel together with the incoming Trump administration should do is say, look, we're going to give everybody a chance to do this over again, repeal the resolution and pass something that's acceptable. And if not, we're going to take steps to show our unhappiness. I just think it was a very bad idea." Joining us now is Naftali Bennett. He is Israel's Minister of Education, member of the Security Cabinet, and head of the Jewish Home Party, who is a settlement supporter. Minister, welcome, and thank you for joining us from Jerusalem this morning. Let me first ask, is it fair to punish the whole United Nations, do you think, when the Security Council represents, 15 different views of 15 different nations and is not the UN itself?
Well, I think the United Nations has turned into a ridiculous body that's fighting the free world instead of supporting the free world in its battle against radical Islam, which is really the main enemy. Israel is the size of New Jersey, and on our borders, of a country the size of New Jersey. We've got ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, and Hamas, all of them on Israel's borders, and we're out there fighting them and defending the free world against radical Islam. And then comes the United Nations and sort of stabs us in the back, which is the most ridiculous thing to do. That's why I think it does make sense to try and straighten out this organization and make it be working for its own values.
Well, you know, some say that it strayed, some of it has strayed from the values. The UN Watch says this last year in 2016, the General Assembly passed 20 resolutions, 20 against Israel, and 4 against the whole rest of the world. So why is it seemingly so Israeli myopic?
Well, because it's warped. This is a distorted view of the world. And you have countries like Iran, like Venezuela, that are huge abusers of human rights, and they're out condemning Israel, which is an open and free democracy. I don't know how many people out there know that in Israel, Supreme Court judges are Arab. We have Arab members of Knesset. Arabs enjoy full equal rights, vote for the Knesset, pay their taxes. Show me another country in this region that has such an open and free democracy. And we're the ones out fighting for the free world against radical Islam. So why would you throw us under the bus? Why would the UN do that? Certainly, we need to reevaluate the whole operations of the United Nations.
Well, you talk about throwing under the bus. The supporters of the resolution, last week would not agree with that. I mean, what do you say to the critics and the resolution itself that says that the settlements and continued building that you support are a violation of international law, that it is Israel being provocative and aggressive, and this will not help the two-state Palestinian solution, as well as endangering peace?
Well, 180 degrees wrong. There is already a Palestine. We founded a Palestine in Gaza, and they screwed it up. They turned it into enemy territory. They turned it into another Afghanistan. They used it as a launch pad to shoot thousands of rockets on Tel Aviv and Israel. So there is already a two-state solution. We don't need another Palestinian state that would create havoc in Israel.
And what is that two-state solution? I mean, you've called for the annexing of the West Bank. I mean, is Israel really going to take that responsibility? And wouldn't that incite the Arab world, especially the Arab street?
Precisely the opposite. We're not annexing anything because it's our land. It was granted to us by the League of Nations in 1920. And you know what? Anyone who opens up the Bible also sees that the land of Israel has belonged to the Jews for just about 4,000 years. So it's not anyone's land to give us. It is the Jewish land. And the whole Western world understands that.
Well, certainly,
so we're not annexing anything. We're applying our law on...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Palestinian Authority, of course, I mean, certainly does not agree with that. They recognized Israel in 1993, but not as a Jewish state.
Right, I know, and they don't think, the Arab world, unfortunately, does not think that the Jews should have a Jewish state anywhere, and certainly not here in Israel. So we get that. We're not, illusioning ourselves or telling ourselves that somehow the radical Islam world will ever accept us. We get it. Neither Iran nor ISIS will ever accept a Jewish state here. But that's why we're strong. That's why we're out there fighting. And I think we're a beacon of light in this very tumultuous region. Now, the President-elect Trump, who is a big American patriot, he gets it. He understands that it's time for a fresh approach. I think his success in the business world is a result of creativity, of bold approaches, and that's what we need now here in the Middle East. Well, not to go down the path that's failed so many times, but to reevaluate everything.
Well, certainly there have been decades of this continuation, and he has called for an ultimate deal. We'll see what happens when he takes office. Naftali Bennett, Minister of Education, member of the Security Cabinet, thank you for joining us. You were born in Haifa, but your parents are from San Francisco, so you certainly have American roots and understand both sides very well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Patty Ann?
Eric, a football game turns into a political platform. Why 2 demonstrators dodged security to hang a banner, a giant one, in protest. And President Obama set to meet with Democratic lawmakers this week, how he's hoping to save his signature health care law.
If we don't get rid of Obamacare, it will destroy health care in North Carolina and all over the United States. It will be the end I'm asking for your vote so we can replace Obamacare and save health care.
And we have a Fox News alert on our top story today. Authorities in Turkey searching for that gunman who shot and killed 39 people in that nightclub on New Year's Eve. Turkish officials say 8 people have so far been arrested, but that shooter, well, the terrorist, is still on the run. ISIS now claims responsibility for this attack, claiming the gunman is one of its soldiers. Turkey, meanwhile, is retaliating against the radical Islamic terrorist group, saying its military has so far hit 100 ISIS targets in Syria just in the last 24 hours.
President Obama will huddle with Democratic lawmakers this week, hoping to save his signature health care law. As President-elect Trump and congressional Republicans say repealing Obamacare is a top priority. Steve Moore is an economic advisor to the Trump transition team, a distinguished visiting fellow of the Heritage Foundation, and a Fox News contributor. Thanks as always for joining us.
Hi, Patty Ann. Happy New Year.
You too. So let's start with what Republicans say are the biggest flaws of the Affordable Care Act.
Well, I think you just mentioned, too, the biggest, the fact that people couldn't keep their own doctor and hospital. But I think the much bigger one was the exploding costs. In fact, I think that's one of the leading factors that won Donald Trump the election. Remember, Patty Ann, it was just a couple of weeks before the election when the news came out that under Obamacare, premiums were going up 20, 25%, in some cases, some states 50, 75%, and that simply isn't sustainable. You know, Obamacare was supposed to save families money, and instead the costs were exploding. The other thing that was happening, Patty Ann, that I think is one of the reasons that Donald Trump really wants to get rid of Obamacare is there are so many counties in the United States right now, especially in a lot of rural areas, where instead of having a multitude of choices in terms of health care providers and insurance, you only had one. And I think some estimates, 1 out of 4 counties in America, you only have one insurance company. Well, that's not a lot of choice. And I think what Republicans need to do if they're going to win this debate is show to the American people they can come up with an alternative that covers everybody and give them way more choices in terms of what kind of health insurance you want.
Well, that is the key. Mr. Trump has, of course, vowed to repeal Obamacare and replace it with something better.
Yep.
But he's also said the replacement might include some of the more popular elements of ACA. You're one of his advisors. It is early, but what do you envision for the replacement?
Well, the first thing you have to do is get rid of one of the most insidious features of Obamacare that's really driven up costs, which is called the mandated benefit program, which basically says there's something like 35 or 40 services that every health insurance has to have. And that makes insurance much more expensive, especially for young people, Patty. And I mean, I have 2 kids just out of college. You know, even with all the subsidies that are provided under Obamacare, the costs of an insurance plan under Obamacare for a young person are, 2 to 3 times higher than they would be if they could just go and shop around. So you got to get rid of the mandated benefit program. And then the other thing you have to do is start looking at things like the 50-worker rule. I mean, remember, the other feature of Obamacare that I neglected to mention is that it's hurt the economy. It's hurt employment because employers can't afford the coverage, and the way they hold their insurance coverage down is by hiring fewer workers. So those are all the kinds of things you need to change in this law. And by the way, the big issue, is that the Democrats and Republicans are going to be loggerheads on this. As you said, this is Barack Obama's, not just his signature issue, this is his legacy. And Democrats are going to fight, like it's 4th down on the 1-yard line to try to prevent Republicans from repealing this. But the Republicans, I think, have to be able to prove to the American people, yeah, we're going to provide coverage for everybody, but we're going to do it in ways that really lower your costs and provide you much more competition and choice.
Well, the Democrats are meeting one day after Congress reconvenes to figure out how to fight this. It's a big battle brewing. We'll see what happens.
Well, it's going to be difficult for them, Patty Ann, because let's face it, I mean, they don't have a majority in the House. They don't have a majority in the Senate. They won't have the White House. And the issue, I think, going forward is whether Republicans can do this through what's called the reconciliation process, which is to say they could actually repeal key features of Obamacare with just 51 votes in the Senate. If that happens, Democrats can scream and holler all they want. They're not going to be able to prevent Republicans from doing this.
All right. Steve Moore, thanks as always.
Thank you.
Eric?
Well, Patty Ann, did you see that big protest at an NFL game in Minnesota over the weekend? Well, 2 people were arrested for unveiling a massive banner and hanging it from the rafters, as you can see, that opposed the controversial Dakota Access Pipeline. Kelly Wright has the details.
That sign could have fallen. They could have fallen. Protesters are taken into custody after unveiling a banner high above fans watching the Vikings game at U.S. Bank Stadium in Minneapolis Sunday. They climbed to the top of the stadium and dangled from the beams, with many wondering how they were able to get through security with their sign and equipment.
I talked to a couple fans that were sitting right there, and the lady said that the lady carried the sign in her backpack. So she carried it in and threw a backpack into the stadium, and then they climbed up the stairs. I don't know how they got past the security at that point.
While police arrested 3 people, including the 2 who rappelled from the ceiling, they don't handle security for that stadium.
The security screening is not done by us, so for me to say exactly how they got through wouldn't be fair.
Their sign was an attempt to draw attention to the protest against the Dakota Access Pipeline, which they say threatens tribal lands and the environment in North Dakota.
I think these guys, are just basically trying to shed light on their message, and they definitely achieve their goal.
A spokesperson for the pipeline opposition group says they want the sponsor for the stadium, U.S. Bank, to stop supporting the pipeline.
They have $175 million invested in Energy Transfer Partners, the parent company to the Dakota Access Pipeline. This is a great place to stage a very public demonstration urging the bank to divest from the pipeline.
The pipeline company is now going to court in order to try and finish the project. In Washington, Kelly Wright, Fox News.
Well, President-elect Trump says he wants to be completely confident about intelligence claims that Russian hackers tried to influence the presidential election. Why he wants to meet with intel officials and press them on it.
And we will have a whale of a tale. Look at that. To begin the new year in the Big Apple.
Steve attracts all kinds of visitors to New York City. Check this out. This year, a whale was spotted swimming in the East River off Manhattan. A police patrol boat discovered it and snapped this picture. The Coast Guard says it appears to be a humpback, and they will keep an eye on it until it heads back out to open water.
Well, President-elect Donald Trump says he wants to sit down with intelligence officials to press them on those claims that Russia was behind those cyber attacks during the presidential election. As you know, Mr. Trump has cast doubt on the conclusions of our nation's intelligence agencies, and he went into some detail about all this when he spoke to reporters at Mar-a-Lago on New Year's Eve.
I just want them to be sure, because it's a pretty serious charge, and I want them to be sure. And if you look at the weapons of mass destruction, that was a disaster, and they were wrong. And so I want them to be sure. I think it's unfair if they don't know. And I know a lot about hacking, and hacking is a very hard thing to prove. So it could be somebody else. And I also know things that other people don't know, and so they cannot be sure of the situation.
Like what do you know that other people don't know?
You'll find out on Tuesday or Wednesday.
Jillian Turner served on the White House National Security Council in the Bush and Obama administrations. She's vice president of the Jones Group and a Fox News contributor, and joins us now. So, Jillian, you just heard that Mr. Trump says he knows a lot of things that other people don't know. He's going to reveal all this on Tuesday or Wednesday. What incarnation could he possibly know?
I mean, my guess there is that he probably has got some cyber experts on his staff internally who he trusts and is relying on here. But the great thing is that I think he's going to sit down with the intelligence community and hopefully hash this out with him. This is really a great opportunity to get this relationship back on track. I think it's in his interest for his administration, and it's in the interest of the American people to have President-elect Donald Trump with a really good relationship with the intelligence community. And so I'm hopeful this meeting will be a little bit of an opportunity to reset that, because it's sort of derailed before he's even assumed office.
Derailed. I mean, it's kind of, exploded. I mean, do you think it's possible to, as you say, reset that? How do you think this meeting will go? And what do you think the officials will actually present to Mr. Trump to maybe convince him that Russia allegedly was behind all this?
I think that every American president, when they assume office, has the chance to really forge their own unique relationship with the intelligence folks. And it's different from administration to administration. We only have to look to President Bush and President Obama to see how that's kind of really ebbed and flowed over the years. The best the best administrations have really close relationships with the intelligence community, and even if they sometimes get it wrong, which they do, they stand by them. They don't publicly hang them out to dry. They don't betray them, and they encourage them to really think outside the box and be innovative. So I think that Donald Trump's best chance for success with them here and vice versa is to really be honest and candid. I think they're going to lay out some information they haven't maybe before for him. I don't think, no matter what they present to him by way of new information, I don't think they're going to convince him that Russian hacking swayed the election to his advantage. But I think what they will convince him of is that there was some that Russia at least attempted to interfere. There were some intrusions, and I think that's the best way to go forward.
Well, do you think he'll then come out maybe after this meeting and say, all right, they presented me with this information. I believe that Russia was behind it, influencing it, but it did not result in the impact. Or do you think he'll come out and say, I wasn't convinced, I believe what I believe, and they still have to show me more?
I mean, I certainly hope that he comes out of this with some more support and respect for those folks. I know he feels betrayed by them, and I know he feels like they've been politically motivated throughout the course of his campaign, but this is a chance to kind of really get down to the nitty-gritty with them and form a new assessment that's not based on how the media is portraying the intelligence community, but is based on his interactions with them, and that's where this gets really important. I think if he can establish a baseline level of trust with them, it'll go a long way. So I hope he comes out of the meeting saying that. I think it's been very hurtful not only to him but to America's national interest when he repeatedly calls out their sort of biggest, most public failure, which was the 2003 mistake about citing weapons of mass destruction in Saddam Hussein's Iraq. I think that's old news. I think that was 14 years ago now. Most of the people who were serving then are gone.
I mean, at the time, Hans Blix and others pointed to the fact that Saddam Hussein had 500 tons of mustard gas reported that they never accounted for. But finally and quickly, 20 seconds, you talk about being hurt. You're a veteran of intelligence for years. How do you feel about what's happened, and what is your advice specifically to Mr. Trump?
I don't like it. I think that it's damaging to America's prestige around the world. So if President Trump can muster enough trust and enough support coming out of this meeting to really proclaim that publicly, it makes us better, and it will project strength abroad to Russia and all of our other adversaries around the world.
Jillian Turner, a veteran of the Obama and Bush administrations. Thank you. Patty Ann.
Thanks, Eric.
Eric, an urgent situation at our southern border. What's being done to handle a massive spike in illegal immigration?
And a vandal in Southern California targeted that iconic sign. Take a look at that. How he was able to pull that off.